What's up, everybody? I'm John Middlekauff. You know what I need you to do. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. We got content for days reacting to every NFL game all the time, every single day. Subscribe, like the videos. Let's go. What is going on, everybody? The lot going on. I mean, these NFL doubleheaders are a lot to keep up with. Fresh off the Chargers losing to the Cardinals on a last-second field goal. Very questionable, unnecessary roughness, personal foul penalty that would have had the Cardinals up against it on 3rd and long that clearly changed the game. And then they took advantage of because James Conner's a monster. The Ravens, the score looks closer. Destroy the Bucs. At one point, the score in the fourth quarter was 41-18. To me, the stories of that game we'll dive into. King Henry looks like he's in the prime of his career, and the Bucs had a devastating night. It ended with Chris Godwin in an air cast. Todd Bowles, right before I hopped on, it said that dislocation of an ankle. Mike Evans looked like he had a very, very painful hamstring injury. Obviously did not return. He was dominating the game. And then the game completely flipped, and the Ravens, they look freaking awesome. I mean, that offense, adding Derrick Henry, I mean, they have the MVP of the league. You get Mark Andrews. We'll dive into it because the Ravens are humming right now. The Bucs, who were humming even early in that game, are now in complete shambles. The Cardinals are just this feisty team. You know, James Conner, Kyler, and the Chargers, who had an opportunity to go 4-2, fall to 3-3. So, we'll dive into that, and we'll do a little bit of my penthouse and my outhouse so far in the NFL after week 7, as we kind of, not quite to the second half of the season, but getting pretty close. The season's flying by. Before we dive in, if you want to go to any game, World Series is right around the corner. Just texted with my buddy. Turns out, a new buddy, Jeff, who's a listener of the podcast, good friends there in Boone. So he's going to New York to watch the Yankees. If you want to go to the World Series, if you can, if you're a big Yankee fan or Dodger fan, they got pretty big fan bases. You want to go to a college game. I was on the phone today with one of our sales reps, and he lives in Franklin, Tennessee. He said he went to Knoxville. Said it was the coolest atmosphere he's ever seen. Cotton Bowl was cool, but I don't think it was quite Knoxville or LSU. So if you want to get to an SEC game, if you want to get to a Big Ten game, the ratings on these games, I mean, college football is so popular right now. The NBA's starting, the NHL's starting. So a lot of different events, a lot of concerts. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with my friends, my partners, the official ticketing app of this podcast, Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code JOHN for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code JOHN for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. Not going to be negative. Don't love these Monday night games, but we're gonna start positive because football's better than no football, even though one game would have been fine. Let's start with the Ravens-Tampa Bay game. And I want to start with Baltimore, who obviously was the number 1 seed, and people like me not only thought they were going to beat the Chiefs, but expected them to win the Super Bowl because of what they did to the 49ers on that Christmas Day, Christmas Eve, whatever night. They destroyed them, right, at Levi Stadium. This defense is not as good, but this offense is looking incredible. The offensive line, which was a question mark early in the season, looks a lot more formidable, but offensively, they have the MVP of the league. Lamar's one of the best quarterbacks, definitely one of the most dynamic players in NFL history. And they showed his stats tonight in the history of Monday Night Football. I mean, he's got to be one of the greatest Monday Night Football players in the history of the league. And he is playing at a really, really high level. And part of that is because his friend, Mark Andrews, is back from a major injury from last year. Looks fantastic. Looks like he's coming into his own. He keeps getting healthy. He is a high-end player. We know Likely's really good. Zay Flowers is a stud. Bateman was making plays tonight. But to me, the difference in this team, like watching Harbaugh, he's basically running the Ravens backfield over the last 3 or 4 years. Derrick Henry is one of the best running backs in the history of the NFL, in the history of the sport. Honestly, he's one of the most unique body types in the history of the league. I went to a Titans practice years ago. My buddy Ryan was getting married, and we had his bachelor party in Nashville. And it was like, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And I'm like, you know what? I'm going to make a week of it. I went on like Monday afternoon. I was like, I'll take my golf clubs and I'll go to a Titans practice. Knew John Robinson. Actually interviewed him for this podcast in his office. This was before the volume was created. And I went to a practice. Matt LaFleur was actually the offensive coordinator that year, had just been hired. It was OTAs. And I remember being at practice standing. I took a picture. This must have been 2018. And it was Dion Lewis standing next to Derrick Henry. And I just remember looking at this human being going, how could you possibly think about tackling this guy? And as the game's going tonight, and you go, obviously there are other offensive pieces, and like I said, Lamar, they've been great for a long time, specifically the quarterback. But they've never had anything quite like this. So yeah, their defense isn't as good. It's not as dominant as last year, clearly. From a pass defense standpoint, a lot of question marks. But they can slow down the game. In theory, the problem is Derrick Henry keeps busting off touchdown runs. He looks as fresh as he's ever looked in his career. And he was already a Hall of Famer before this season. I added it up today. Between high school, college, and the NFL, he had over 4,100 career carries coming into this game. As someone pointed out on social media, he was in the same draft class as Ezekiel Elliott. And he looks like 24 years old, just about to get his first contract. How can he look this good? And the thing with running backs is the last attribute you actually need, like it's not a prerequisite to be a great player, is high-end breakaway speed. A lot of great running backs have not been home run hitters. It's actually a pretty rare trait. I would say the best guy of my life, my adult life, the last 20 plus years, in terms of open field high end speed, was Adrian Peterson. If he got in the open field, no one could catch him. That's Derrick Henry. Like, he gets a crease, he's gone. And you would have thought, because like most running backs with that many carries, that much mileage, they just wouldn't be as good. And to me, someone who's just been watching football for a long time, he looks as good as ever. And you add that piece, and we've talked about it before, it's easily one of the best signings, especially when you factor in how much he costs, of this NFL season. Honestly, there might not really be a close second. And he's now playing on what feels like the best offense right there with Detroit in the NFL. Detroit just lost their home run hitter, Jameson Williams, to suspension for a couple weeks. But if they get this Derrick Henry in the playoffs, and this is someone who said, I don't feel comfortable betting on this team against the Chiefs ever again. And then you watch them the last couple weeks, you're like, gotta change my tune. You're like, now it's going to be harder for them to get home field advantage because the Chiefs already have a couple game lead because they have not lost, obviously. And the craziest game so far of the NFL season, looking back, is the Raiders upsetting the Ravens down 10 points in Baltimore. That's just one of those we're going to look back as like, how did that happen? Raiders actually did it last year, remember, on Christmas to the Chiefs. But I think he adds an element that they haven't quite had. They've had a good run game, but they have a guy that, unlike last year, it's like, let's get away from the run game. It's like, guys, you're down a touchdown. Let's take a deep breath. The Chiefs don't have 40 points on the field or on the scoreboard. Just relax. Play your game. I actually think it's going to be easier for them in theory. Again, they have to do it to just hand that guy the ball. Because you're watching them in these games, they feel much more inclined. All else fails, hand it to 22. Hand it to 22. And then Lamar throughout the game can just do his magical stuff, which is just, it's insane how good the guy is. People think I'm like a Lamar Jackson hater. I mean, he's remarkable. He really is. But I think Derrick Henry has a chance to take this team to the next level because, let's face it, their defense is more than good enough. You don't have to have the number one defense in the league to win the Super Bowl. But as we know, you have to have a good defense. They have a good defense, and they have a defensive culture. They'll be fine. They'll have to shore up a little bit of the pass game. But again, if they're playing the Chiefs aren't exactly throwing up 35 points. So they have to win a game in the teens. It's easier to do that with Derrick Henry, and I've really just been blown away. So props to the Ravens, who at 0-2 have come storming back and look fantastic. The NBA is finally back. A new season means new ways to get into the action at DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. Who's draining threes from beyond the arc? Who's hit the boards, getting rebounds? Get behind your favorite players on prop bets you can make on DraftKings, the home of NBA player props. Ready to place your first bet? Try betting something simple, like picking a team to win. Go to DraftKings Sportsbook app and place your bet. First time, new DraftKings customers bet $5 to win $200 in bonus bets instantly. Take it to the rack with DraftKings Sportsbook. Every point counts. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and use the code JOHN. That's code JOHN for new customers to get $200 in bonus bets when you bet just $5. Only on DraftKings. The crown is yours. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I mean, that game started, you're just like, God, Baker's playing out of his mind. Like, are they going to roll the Ravens? They're up 10-0. It honestly easily could have been 14-0. Then it looked like Baker hit Mike Evans for a touchdown that I think would have put him up, 21-7. And Mike Evans got hurt. And then the game spiraled. And Baker threw a red zone pick. He threw another bad pick. And then the floodgates opened and the Ravens ran away with the game. But obviously they lost Mike Evans, which I think it's fair to say is going to miss some time. And then at the end of the game, which I'm not going to be critical of having Godwin and Baker in that spot, even though the Ravens had already pulled Lamar and Henry, and their starting skill guys by that point. But his ankle went the opposite way, and he got carted off in an air cast. And they didn't show the replay. Clearly, it was awful. And you knew right away when Baker was on kind of like, two legs kneeling down and looking the other way and slamming his helmet that it was really, really awful. And I worked with Todd Bowles in Philadelphia. He's a super, super high level guy. He's actually a very intense, calm guy. He's one of those rare defensive guys. He's not like a huge yeller and a screamer. There's a lot of pressure on him right now because you lose games. You play the Ravens, you play the Chiefs, you play great teams, even at home. Monday Night Football, sometimes something weird happens, you lose. No big deal. Even getting your ass kicked, it's like, okay, we took it on the chin. Take a deep breath. That's not just a loss. That's losing Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, which was one of the reasons that Baker Mayfield, one of the main reasons, led the league in touchdown passes and had one of the most dynamic offenses in the league. So I think it's fair to assume that Chris Godwin is gone for the season. And Mike Evans, who they mentioned tonight, has not missed many games in his career, is going to miss some time. I don't really know how you overcome that. Their defense isn't as good as it has been in years past. They've been very dependent on the offense. And now remove your best two offensive weapons on the outside by a mile. An elite Hall of Fame outside wide receiver and just this dynamic, versatile piece in Godwin. Those guys are championship winning players. And their next 3 games are on a short week playing Atlanta, who I don't think's that good, but you remove Evans and Godwin, that's tough. Then you have to go to Kansas City. And then, who knows who's going to be playing for the 49ers by then, but it's still not going to be an easy matchup. The 49ers. So this was before the game started, even if you lost, you went, listen, if you can just somehow go 2-2 in this spot, hell, beat the Falcons and go 1-3, you're in good shape. Now it feels like they're not a lock to win any of these games without those 2 players. That is one of those losses that is just emotionally gutting. We saw it with the Lions last week. Losing Hutchinson was really, really tough. And I think you saw early in that game in Minnesota, not that they were shell-shocked, but it was like, it felt like it was still hovering over them. Then they got it together. They got their bearings. You can't lose 2 of those guys. I don't know if you can shake that. I was a big believer in the Bucs after the first, 4 or 5 games of this season. I thought like this team's going to the playoffs. Now I go, I there's just Todd Bowles is going to have to be a magician here. Somehow rally the troops, somehow get his defense to play better. They're going to have to rely on Baker to be perfect. Cannot be turning the ball over. He's thrown a lot of touchdowns, but the last couple of games throws some picks. Though 2 weeks ago, some of those were, just kind of freaky picks, balls tipped. Tonight, the two were pretty bad. Uh, that's hard. That's really, really difficult because when fully healthy, you went their offense is a lot like Baltimore, right? Obviously, Lamar's better than Baker, but two elite wide receivers, a really good tight end. Bucky Irving looks fantastic. The offensive coordinator, Liam Cohen, who had been in with the Rams and McVay and coached at Kentucky, was doing a really, really good job. It's like this team's going to win 10 games. And now it's one of those when you show up to the office tomorrow, it's going to be hard to hold your head up high, not just because you lost, but because you look around. It's like, is Mike Evans going to have to go on injury reserve? We know Godwin is. I mean, if you had the list, obviously the quarterback's number one. If you were doing a top five guys that you would cannot afford to lose, Mike probably be one, and Godwin would definitely be in the top three or four. So huge game for Baltimore, dominated. Henry MVP form. Same with Lamar and the Bucs. Man, what a shitty night to be a Tampa fan. Uh, you try to sometimes you already get a take ready. You're like, I can't wait to fire this one out. And it was going to be, last year, it's kind of crazy. The Chargers went 5-12. They went 5-12. Now, they drafted five, so clearly they had a really bad record. But when you say it out loud, you're like, God, I knew they were bad, but 5 wins, and you realize they didn't really win any games at the end once they shit canned Brandon Staley. But they were really, really bad. And I think they're going to, I've been like, Harbaugh's going to win this game. And he's already going to have 4 wins. And then a penalty happens. And let's face it, they're down 2 points at the 1 yard line with like 10 minutes to go. And they have an 8-minute drive that ultimately led to a third, I think it was 3rd and 6, 3rd and 5, maybe, that Justin Herbert took a shot. Harbaugh's freaking out, thinking it should be pass interference. I don't love shot plays or even options on that. Like run some quick outs, run some quick crossing routes, get the ball to McConkey on a rollout. Just let's just get a first down, keep the drive moving. The margin for error on that play, even if the wide receiver, doesn't get hit off his route or held or whatever. I had no problem with him not calling the penalty on that. I don't like that decision by Herbert, that play call even as an option. Run something that's going to give me a chance at a first down and kind of end the game. But they didn't. And then they gave it back to Kyler Murray, who the first 2 plays of the drive, you're like, didn't even sniff a completion. And then a flag came out about 5 minutes late. And we went on this rant last week on Monday Night Football when the referees were it's one of the worst officiated games you'll ever watch in the NFL. Like we're all used to bad calls, right? I always say it all the time. I understand the human element. I just reserve the right to get worked up if it's a team I like or I got money on the game. It's part of the fun of this. But there comes a point where you jump the shark of this is beyond egregious. What are we doing here? And I say it all the time with college when they get aggressive with throwing kids out. Nobody's trying to hurt anybody. Nobody is. But it still is football. And people are going to get tackled and hit hard. It's part of the sport. This is a very violent game. It's honestly what built up to become such a popular sport. And then because of the concussions, because of the lawsuits, I get we've had to pivot and change. And I'm all for trying to make sure the best quarterbacks stay healthy. But on some of these plays down the field, defensive backs and linebackers are allowed to hit people. They really are. And some of these times, just because it looks bad, doesn't mean it actually was. And he not only didn't connect with his helmet, he barely touched the guy. But Jim Harbaugh had freaked out so much on the previous drive that he was almost, he just kind of gave up, put his hands in the air. And it ultimately cost him the game. And the one thing is, if you are gonna screw up. And listen, I don't feel necessarily bad for the Chargers, right? How many points they scored? 15. So anytime that you're in a game and what was the final score? Yeah, 15 to 17 to 15. So if you're scoring in the mid-teens, you allow for the option for weird shit to happen. If a big play breaks, like you didn't do enough to play winning football. And the Chargers are like the poor man's version of the Chiefs. They want to play with defense. They want to slow down the game and they want to try to win like 18 to 10. Like that's where they're 21 to 17. Like that's what they're going to be comfortable doing. But when you do that and your team is not as good as the Chiefs, your margin for error is really small. And the one thing with the Cardinals, which are one of the more all over the team place teams in the NFL, they have electric players. I mean, Kyler's run tonight, I mean, looked like the short version of Lamar. He is one of the great athletes in the sport. So if you screw up, take a bad angle, he can take it 50, as he did. James Conner, part of it is the team that he plays for is not like some huge brand. Even tonight, they played on ESPN Plus. So I can imagine there are some people listening to this that did not watch the game. I didn't understand when everyone was bitching and moaning about it online. The game's on ESPN Plus. I'm like, it's just on regular TV for me. And then I realized on the local markets, they put it on, one of the main broadcast channels. It was on Fox for me. But I understand anyone pushing back ESPN Plus. Seems a little egregious to me. I mean, I get it. Business partner, they're trying to grow that. I'm an ESPN Plus guy because I watch a lot of golf on that. Any of you UFC guys probably have it as well. It serves a purpose in my life, but I get not everyone's buying that thing. And if you're not a Charger or a Cardinal fan and there's another game on, you could easily go, yeah, I'm not. I don't care that much. Totally understand. But that was a game that came down to a call. Now, the Cardinals still might have pulled some plays out of their ass because they have Trey McBride, stud. Harrison, he's going to be really damn good. And like we said, at any moment, a lot like, kind of the poor man's version of Lamar, Kyler can do things that are out of this world. And there's not many better freelance players in the NFL than Kyler. So as the game gets tight, tie game, or you're down two, fourth downs, like that's where he's one of the scarier players. He is a very difficult player. If he gets into a little bit a rhythm in his team, if his defense is playing okay, to just series in, series out if the game's close, he's tough to defend. But you just can't make that call. It just can't happen. And I was anyone that watched the Texas Georgia game, I like Georgia in that game, but I had so many parlays tied with the Nebraska covering the spread, which obviously it didn't do. So it didn't cost me any money, but I just found myself rooting for Georgia in that game. I understand the call that they screwed up on the pass interference that led to a pick that they said was pass interference. They had spotted the ball, as in it was pass interference. They were going to give Georgia the ball, and then the entire Texas crowd threw beer bottles, water bottles, and other things on the field, and then they just reversed the call. Like, and everyone was saying, well, at least they got the call right. Well, that literally never happens. I have never seen that happen. After it's one thing, bang, bang play. It's like, hey, we got it wrong. Change it right there. Okay. But it had been a long time. They all agreed, call, spot the ball, even if it's the wrong call. This is one that come on, guys. Can everyone kind of look around? Can we get this right? That play, can you guys see the review? That just can't happen. So I understand. I'm probably recording this right as the post game is going on. That if I'm Harbaugh, I'm incensed. And if I'm the Cardinals, I'm 3-4. And I'm pretty sure that I'm in second place because I beat the Niners straight up, so they'd be in third place. And I'm right there. So crazy night. Derrick Henry just shows why he's a Hall of Famer. Tampa has one of the worst injury games you'll ever see with high-end players at the same position going down in the same game. The Chargers play their style of football, have a lead with under 2 minutes, and kind of get screwed by the referees. And then the Cardinals take advantage of that because they do have really, really good offensive players. They really do. And it's weird. Would you feel great if Kyler is your quarterback? No. Like, are you confident that he's a true franchise guy? Like, every year, he's going to give me an opportunity to be a consistent player to be in the playoffs. You don't. But then at the same time, you watch individual games and you go, he can do more things than some of those guys in that bucket on an individual game basis. He's just really a roller coaster. You don't really know what you're going to get week to week. Like, part of the reason, like, Jared Goff's better now, but like, same with Dak. But like Dak, Cousins, Goff, kind of that crew of guys for a long period of time, it was like, they're somewhere between 9 to 13 range you can win with, but you kind of know what you're getting. And they've all kind of improved over the course of their career, especially, I mean, Jared Goff's playing at an MVP level. Kirk Cousins is actually playing pretty well too, aside from last week, which wasn't all his fault. His defense was terrible, but they've just, and Dak's had three really, really good seasons in a row. But like Kyler could have games where it's like, those guys can't do that. Like, they can't make that throw. They can't throw it that far. They can't run that fast. And then you watch other games, you're like, is this the worst team I've ever seen? What's going on? Just a very, very, there's just not really a team like them in the NFL. And I think a big reason for that is Kyler, who is, when they're playing well, is just an auto watch, an auto watch. And if I was a video game player, he would be very, very fun to play with. So yeah, fun little Monday night. And I I think we skipped, did we skip this last week? Maybe I did it last week, but a little penthouse outhouse. Uh I last week I was in Nashville. And I'm a Marriott guy. I'm simple. Stay at just a lot of normal Marriotts. Every once in a while, if I'm feeling frisky, stay at a JW. And I'm not opposed to staying at a Spring Hill Suites. Your boy's been there. But we're getting married at a little place called the Four Seasons. So I'm like, you know what? They're giving us a big discount. Let's stay there for a couple days. First time I'd ever stayed there. I'm not like I'm a normal Four Seasons guy. And even with the discount, shit ain't cheap. And at the Four Seasons in Nashville, they also have like living quarters. So they have a hotel, which is really big. And then on top of one side of the hotel, they have like condos and suites. And on the top, they originally built them like 4 years ago, and they were going to sell them all. Some you could get for like a 1 bedroom or 2 bedrooms, $1 million, a couple $1 million. And on the top was the penthouse suite. And it originally listed for $36 million. I guess it was enormous. And obviously it didn't sell. So what they did is they split it in two. And they ended up selling them both off. They're still, I think, I mean, thousands of square feet, like enormous penthouse suites. And one of the guys that bought one of them, like the person wouldn't really give me all the details, but one of the persons they said, because they put it out there publicly, is the dude that owns Raising Cane's, Todd Graves, I think his name is, LSU guy. Hangs out with a bunch of the LSU guys, and they just put one in downtown Nashville that is crushing, and that's why I think he wanted to purchase them. Obviously, Raising Cane's doing pretty well, but I was thinking about, like, and I've been saying this for a while, there is no doubt about it. In any building, the nicest penthouse suite, I don't care how ugly their games are, they just figure it out. They just figure it out. And I was texting with a buddy on the Chiefs because I was like, did you guys go back to Kansas City? He's like, no, we went to Vegas because they're playing the Raiders this week. He's like, we're staying there. And we were texting about Karlofskis and Trent McDuffie. And they drafted those guys right the year that they traded Tyreek Hill. So in the year they traded Tyreek Hill, they had 2 first-round picks, and they took Trent McDuffie and Karlofskis. Obviously, 95 is their most talented and best defensive player. But no one plays as hard. And I mean, those are their next two players, Karlofskis and McDuffie, in whatever order you want. Those guys through 3 seasons, they have 2 Super Bowl rings, year 1 and year 2. And in year 3, they're yet to lose a game. Like, think about their experience in the NFL compared to other people in their draft, like guys that were just drafted to the Panthers, guys that were just drafted to like the Giants. These guys are like, yeah, you just win rings. You just never lose. I mean, what's the NFL experience like for you? Like, what an incredible place to play football right now as the Kansas City Chiefs. Honestly, if the penthouse still existed up there, 36 million, that'd be theirs. I think the Ravens are right there as well. I mean, their penthouse suite, I feel more confident these last 3 weeks watching Derrick Henry really get going. I'm like, wait, They have a guy who just a couple years ago carried a franchise not only to the playoffs, but like winning playoff games. And he looks exactly the same. Obviously, he's 3 or 4 years older, but he's playing the exact same. And you put him on that team with those offensive weapons, with that quarterback, and their defensive culture. I don't know. I'm starting to like them as much as I did last year because of that guy. That's just an element. Like the J.K. Dobbins, the Gus Edwards, all the type guys they've had, good players, and in their scheme, it's worked. But in the playoffs, it's slowed down a little bit. I've seen that guy in the playoffs run for 2 bills, carry his team to playoff victories on the road and to the AFC Championship game. So I think the Ravens are right there with Kansas City. Detroit's interesting, right? They got to have a penthouse suite too, but you lose Hutchinson, and then today you get Jameson Williams suspended. Now, it's hard to watch them and go, they're gritty, they're tough. Their coach has proven to be really, really good. Their quarterback is playing at an insanely high level. Offensively, when Williams is on the field, they literally have it all. Even removing him for a couple games, not the end of the world. But like you're starting to see little like they're getting thrown a little adversity here. I don't know. I just saw Schefter's tweet. I don't exactly know what's 2 games. Like, is that some drugs or is that what he's doing PEDs? He weighs like 175 pounds. But I think those are clearly the 3 best teams in the league. And then I think you'd have to go down a couple floors, and there's just a large group of everyone else, of all the other good teams. I would put the Packers. I would put Minnesota. I think Minnesota actually showed pretty well, even in the loss. Like I told Colin the other day, I think the Packers are good, and I think if they can just corral Jordan a little bit, because his freelance throwing balls all over the map. Now he's throwing enough touchdowns to make up for it, but that can cost you, as it did last year in the playoffs. But I'm still a believer, and there are a couple more weeks of playing good football away from me putting them in that group. I think the Bills, just when the dust settles, they're going to have 12 or 13 wins. And they're at the point now where they're going to cruise to their division, right? Miami stinks. I mean, they have 1 win, and now Tua's coming back. Let's just keep our fingers crossed he doesn't get KO'd. The Patriots are worse or equally as bad. And they're actually worse if Tua plays, assuming that Tua can stay on the field. And the Jets are 2-5. So, I mean, we're a couple weeks away from the Bills having like a 5-game lead in that division. And Pittsburgh's interesting. Like, I saw a lot of people commenting on stuff like Middlekauff, Russell Wilson. Like, yeah, he threw some lollipop passes. He's maybe better than Justin Fields as a passer. Bar's not very high. But did we take away from that game that he's like a good player? Because I didn't necessarily. I also didn't take away, like, I'm judging these teams on, like, how can you play in the playoffs? Like, could Kevin O'Connell and Brian Flores, if Sam Darnold plays like he did the other day, win playoff games against the other good teams? I believe they can. Can the Packers and the Lions all beat each other? 100%. Could the Ravens beat these other teams? I do think they could do that. We know the Chiefs can. I do believe the Bills, if healthy, which has been a problem for them, can win these playoff games. We've seen it happen. Like, is Russell Wilson beating these teams? Tomlin's awesome. He deserves a lot of credit for that move. And when asked about it after the Sunday Night Football game, he said, "That's why I'm so highly compensated. Thanks, peace." And he walked out. Great line. But, like, they just include Pickens more in the game because he's just throwing it up. And if their running backs are healthy and their offensive line's healthy, they're going to run the ball and play defense. But I don't view Russell Wilson as like the equals to all these other cats. Mahomes, I don't care how shitty Mahomes stats are. Lamar and Josh Allen, like there's a pretty wide gap there. And obviously the Texans have a bunch of injuries, but they get Nico back. Like, I would take my chances with CJ Stroud in a game. Like, who are you picking? CJ Stroud or Russell Wilson? And all these teams are, the Texans would be a home field because they're going to win the division. Like, the Steelers aren't winning that division. Steelers like, we have the same record. Yeah, I know. We'll see how it plays out. And I'm not a Steeler hater. Like, I have nothing but admiration for their culture and everything. But it does get back to upgrade over the last couple of years, right? The Kenny Pickett's, the Mason Rudolphs. I'm not Mitch Trubisky, but it's not like you feel great about Russell Wilson playing these other, like, this crew of all-time great quarterbacks. Like, these guys are good. Mahomes obviously is already a Hall of Famer. Lamar's a Hall of Famer. Josh Allen is going to be a Hall of Famer. Now, Russell, I think I have no problem if he gets in, but that's because of work he did 5 years in previous, not the guy that we've seen recently. And the outhouse is pretty ugly. I would compare the outhouse whenever I go back to California and I land in Sacramento. I used to land in Oakland when I lived there, and you'd go through a bunch of homeless encampments. And these aren't just like a tent. This is like a tent for blocks, just blocks. It's like, God, some of these actually don't look that bad. I mean, they've done a lot of work. I mean, they spent a lot of time building these things up. That to me is some of the bottom level of the NFL. We always have bad teams in the NFL. And someone hit me up on the mailbag, like, are some of these teams, some of the play and coaching worse than normal? I'm like, yeah, possibly. Possibly. Dave Canales and the Carolina Panthers, Gerard Mayo and the New England Patriots. The Las Vegas Raiders aren't leaking oil, like they've broken down on the side of the road. Miami is a little weird because I don't think they're very good if Tua had stayed healthy, but they would not be a 2-win team. I thought they were more likely to be like that 6 or 7, like under, disappoint, just because I didn't think their defense was good. Their offensive line was bad. Probably lose some close games, be a big swing from like 10 to, 7. But still, throughout the course of the season, they would be more than serviceable on a weekly basis. So it's hard if Tua is coming back and he can play in games, they are going to be on a different level than these other teams. Like if Tua was healthy and he just played against Indy, Indy loses that game. They don't win. Every Colts fan would agree with me the way Anthony Richardson was playing. The other team that is really, really difficult to watch, and it's just like, I appreciate this guy changing his health. He looks fantastic relative to what he looked like the last couple of years, Brian Daboll. I actually think for the most part, removing the game on against the Eagles, where his offense didn't have a chance because they couldn't block a soul because their offensive linemen were hurt. He's done a pretty good job calling plays. I've actually been impressed with Brian Daboll. Their defense for a couple of weeks was playing their ass off, but that team's about to spiral. It really is. You lose your left tackle. You can bench Daniel Jones, who's been atrocious. What was the stat yesterday that Saquon Barkley has more touchdowns at MetLife this season than Daniel Jones? I think I saw a quote today from Brian Daboll that Malik Neighbors was open all game long. Maybe Neighbors might have made a comment or something after the game, and he's like, "Listen, I don't mind him being mad. He was open." And the quarterback play is really atrocious. And when your team is that bad on offense, I mean that putrid, even if your defense is playing their balls off, and I think Brian Burns has played really, really hard. We know Dexter Lawrence is really like their defense has tried. You eventually just you get worn out. You kind of give up, not necessarily like with effort, but just because like, what's this all for? What's the point of this? We've all done a job, whether it be a company, whether it be when we're young for like our dad forces us to do something. You're like, this is pointless. Why am I doing this? You get screamed, keep doing it. It's like, okay, but you're making no progress. And that's what happens to bad teams when they have a unit that is just not capable of functioning. And to me, that's the Giants offense. And they have a quarterback problem. Now they have a left tackle problem. They're not going to be able to run the ball. They're going to be really, really bad. Now, the difference, I would say, the Giants, you would obviously take Dayball over Canales, over Mayo, over, the Titans are pretty bad too, but same type deal. Quarterback is just a joke. I mean, a little like the Giants, their defense for a large portion of games this year has played really well. And when your quarterback position cannot function, like we're not asking for Lamar Jackson in his prime or in college like Shador Sanders right now. We just need functional quarterback play to give us a chance, right? And some of these teams at the bottom rung just don't have guys that just can't play. Just can't play. Now Mason Rudolph, is an upgrade over Will Levis, who's injured right now. But the bottom of this league, we are going to have a battle, and I mean a battle for the services of Shador Sanders.